Hello and welcome to Ministry Shift, our regular panel show looking at issues of ministry in a time of change and a time of transition. And so it's particularly appropriate today that we consider those great agents of change, interim ministers. And I'm delighted to be joined by people who either are or have been interim ministers on our show this afternoon. I'm Matthew Parker. I'm the Episcopal visitor for the Stafford Episcopal area, soon to be the new Bishop of Stafford, and it's good to be back in the chair. But let me now introduce those panelists to you. And first of all, I'm going to turn to Philip Swan and ask him to say a little bit about who he is, his context, and why he is interested in interim ministry.
Hello, Philip Swan. Alongside my central sector role of World Mission, I've been an interim minister now for nearly 3 years in the Stafford Episcopal area, doing slightly shorter term ministries, but means I've had quite a kind of range of different briefs and a very fulfilling and satisfying experience it's been too.
Thank you. And to demonstrate both that nothing is new under the sun, or that we are nothing less than international here, it's a great delight to be able to welcome to the show today Cheryl, who comes from our linked Diocese of Capel. So Cheryl, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your interest in interim ministry.
Hi everyone, I'm Cheryl Toth. I'm an Archdeacon here in the Diocese of Capel, and I am coming to you from Regina, Saskatchewan, where it's a balmy -25 Celsius. Beautiful day. And I've been an interim minister and have been also overseeing some changes within our own archdeaconry that have been enabled by interim ministry in some of the parishes.
Thank you very much. And it's a real delight to have you with us. A little close to home, but also a great delight to have you with us. Jessica, tell us about yourself and your interest in this area.
Hello, I'm Jessica. I live in West Felton, which is in Shropshire, and I'm new to all this. And so I've just been appointed assistant interim ministry in Central Telford Parish. So yeah, my interest was when I was thrown into the deep end, and I went on a course to find out what these interim ministers are supposed to be doing, and so it's just quite challenging, really. It's quite good.
That's great, thank you. And it's good to have someone who's new in post to reflect with us. But we may not all be aware exactly what an interim minister is, and so I thought we'd just start by trying to define a little our terms. And I wonder, Cheryl, because you have a lot of experience in the Church of Canada, to tell us how you understand the range of possibilities perhaps for interim ministry.
Well, interim ministry has been part of the Church in North America for the last 30 years or more. And so there's a variety of ways in which it works. Most of the time, it's often employed when there's a period of change that people need, or there's been some kind of conflict within a parish, or if there's been a very long-term incumbency or rector who's been there for a long time and they need some time to think things through. An interim minister comes, what we say is intentional interim minister, comes in with the intention of helping the parish move through a period of reflection and taking them from where they are now to where they hope to be, and guiding them through that change process. So it differs from being there for an interim period between one rector or incumbent and another. It has a purpose with it.
Thank you. So it's not simply stopping a gap, marking time. It actually has that intentional focus that you mentioned. Philip, is that how it's working out, do you think, in this diocese and perhaps in your own experience?
I think so. I think we've got a lot more learning to do, which is part of the kind of excitement of sort of matching a ministry to a context. But actually my first encounter with interim ministry was on a visit to our linked Diocese of Capel. And I think it was that brought home this distinction between what you might call a kind of stopgap or sort of fill-in ministry, which is probably quite convenient, to something that's actually far more thought through and focused and deliberate and intentional, and that carries with it quite a kind of toolkit, really, of specific skills. And I've, over the past 3 years, done, I think, quite unusual, really, to have done quite short-term posts, 6-month posts. And so, you know, from the very beginning, I've known what my brief is, and I've sought to communicate that and for it to be adequately owned too by the church family or the benefice where I'm working. But very, very much, I would say, interim ministry is about ministry in transitional times and in context of transition.
Thank you. Certainly, as someone who has from time to time, as Archdeacon, been able to use interim ministries, it's been absolutely invaluable in terms of just allowing that time of reflection and thinking through before either moving to an appointment or pastoral reorganisation. And we've used, obviously in Philip's case, where it's a sort of turnaround, short, sharp shock, perhaps sometimes, depending on the context, and sometimes longer interim ministries up to 3 years. Jessica, you're new in this, 3 months in, I think, and what kind of interim ministry do you think you're there for?
So I think it's more pastoral, really, and trying to encourage the members of the congregation to be more independent, you know, to stand up and, you know, and be able to do that, work in their own ministries, really. You know, it's not about the incumbent anymore. It's about everyone else trying to get involved in it, and so it's about encouraging people and just bringing them on in themselves and being confident in what they're able to do in their own gifts, really.
So definitely a coming alongside people is key to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Philip, you mentioned earlier a toolkit. What kind of skills? Not everybody's suited to, I wouldn't think, to being an interim minister. It's a particular form and type of ministry. What are the particular skills you think you need to do this role effectively?
I think it's helpful to be a little bit distant. I mean, it's perhaps a strange thing to say, but one of the qualities of an interim minister that's often singled out is being a kind of non-anxious presence. I mean, there are contexts that many of us will know about that we might almost call toxic, you know, where there's also a lot of fear. People are very wounded. They've been seriously let down, often by people who should know better. There's healing work to be done. I mean, in many ways, it's quite a kind of demanding brief, really, and set of qualities that are required. But I suppose, having been previous to this in parish ministry for a long time, it's almost as if it's possible to sort of extract a lot of the core skills that are required, but they have to be employed within a shorter time frame in a more focused way.
Cheryl, thank you.
I think one of the things, just to build on what Philip was saying, is it's helpful to be someone who's willing to think of themselves as being there in a project. It's a short time. It might be 6 months. In my case, the last case, it was close to just over 2 years. But you're entering in a different frame of mind, and you have a sense of how you want to help facilitate a change process. Probably good to be able to not feel too battered by the conflicts that might emerge and not take things personally. And sometimes that really helps to know I'm only here for a couple of years. How bad can it get? and you can move through that. And I think that's a helpful thing as well.
And Cheryl, can you give us an example of where you think you don't have to name parishes or names if you don't want to, but where you think an interim ministry has really been very effective and worked well for you?
I can think of several. Very often, you know, we had two going on at the same time in our archdeaconry. One where they'd had some conflict, I would say some disagreement about the direction and the ministerial personnel. And the other where the parish just said, we need to stop and think before we seek to have another incumbent. We're not sure where we're going, and we're not ready. So in both those cases, one where there was a more pronounced need for reinvigorating the parish, and the other where it was giving people their confidence in one another back, and their ability, helping them come to a place where they could trust, and then be able to make plans moving forward, because the relationships that had been frayed were reinstated.
In some ways, it almost feels like an impossible job to me. I mean, expectations are pretty high. Jessica, does this make you think, oh goodness, I've got to do all that? I mean, you've done 3 months. Do you know how long your interim ministry is for? I assume you do.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be 6 months. Yeah, but I think it's important. One of the things we haven't spoke about is working collaboratively and bringing people alongside with us, and also being able to facilitate transition until we get the changes that we need to happen. And I think that's an important thing, to always be thinking ahead of how we're going to bring about transition, how we're going to bring people along with us and not leave them behind. So, yeah.
Philip.
Yeah, I was aware that within Lichfield Diocese, certain resources have been drawn on, such as bridge builders and such as transforming conversations. And these, in many ways, are kind of using and developing skills that the interim minister draws on big time, because really the capacity to listen and to hear stories, but also the capacity to be strategic and accountable. And I think indeed there's a sense too of preparing for the unexpected. In fact, the reference to preparing makes me think of one of the biblical figures who's often linked with interim ministry, is John the Baptist, as a kind of prototype of what an interim minister might be, preparing the way.
And putting an axe to the root of the tree. Good old John. Yeah, I mean, I think certainly my own experience with interim ministry is that the brief going in is kind of pretty important, really, isn't it? I mean, yeah. There is a sense in which you're exploring when you begin an interim ministry. You shouldn't go in with, you're not the kind of management consultant who's got that job and it's going to be done and that's that. On the other hand, usually there is something in the mind of the bishop or archdeacon or rural dean, whoever, said what might be a good outcome for this parish. And a little bit of a sense of purpose enables you to move that change process that you talked about, Jessica. I mean, going back to, or moving on from that, thinking a little bit about change in a broader sense. Clearly, we're in a time of change, foisted upon us to a certain extent by the pandemic, but also things that have already, previous to that, already an issue in the life of the church. What do you think the role of interim ministers might be? Is it a ministry whose time has come in the future?
I think that from our perspective here in Quapel, it certainly is. We've just coming through a self-assessment of all the parishes in the Archdeaconry, but and out of that, 5 of them elected to explore coming together as one parish. Out of that 5, 3 were already engaged in an intentional interim ministry, and so had been thinking about where they were going and what changes were coming. And the changes were both within the parish, but around us as well in terms of our society. And they've been managing to do that primarily in this kind of way for the last year in a pandemic, and having their meetings, as you frequently you do, this way, and forging relationships in a new way, and having to think, as we all are, creatively about what's going to be on the other side of this. And so I think the intentional ministry does help us think about change in the larger context as well.
Philip.
I think it's an excellent description of this ministry. Say it is one whose time has come, and I think the course that Jessica referred to, which I was also on, means that now there's this remarkable resources that draws on the North American experience, but it's been tailored to the Church of England context, and so the training resources are here. So let's go.
And just finally, Jessica, are you involved? I think you are in Shaping for Mission in your deanery. Is that something you're involved in at the moment?
I'm not exactly involved, but I think that it's important that we think about things in a different way. And I think interim ministry is a way forward. I think we can't be doing the same thing that we did before. It's not going to work. We've got to think outside the box now. And I think this is one of the ways that it can happen. So yeah, I encourage it.
Thank you. So all those of you who are watching, you are involved in the shaping for mission process. You've been given a good sales pitch here for the interim ministry as one way forward. So thank you very much to Philip and Jessica and to Cheryl and to you for watching. Please do like on the Facebook page, share with your friends, and we look forward to seeing you when we are on next. Until then, goodbye.